My name is Alara Vance. I'm 29 and work as a nurse. I was convinced I'd found my own fairy tale when I fell for Julian Croft, a prosperous architect from a long-established wealthy family. But just 3 weeks before our wedding, his parents forced me to sign a prenuptial agreement. "This house belongs to Julian," his mother Serafina said icily, "and you'll walk away with nothing," while Julian stood silently by. Torn between love and pride, I signed, and never dreamed those words would come back to haunt us, until a surprise $22 million inheritance upended everything. I grew up in Millfield, a tiny town where everybody knows your name. My dad labored at the local factory and my mom taught at the elementary school. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling either, just a cozy 3-bedroom house where I shared a room with my sister until I left for nursing school. From day one, my parents taught me that hard work, honesty, and kindness matter far more than material wealth, and those values have shaped who I am today. After graduating from nursing school with honors, I started working at West Side Medical Center, one of the best hospitals in the region. I threw myself into my career, working long shifts in the intensive care unit. I loved being a nurse, despite the emotional and physical demands. There's something incredibly fulfilling about being there for people during their most vulnerable moments. My colleagues became like family, and I built a reputation as someone reliable and compassionate. I met Julian on a Tuesday evening in April. I remember it clearly because I had just finished a 12-hour shift and was exhausted. He was visiting his college roommate, who had undergone an appendectomy. I was checking the patient's vitals when Julian walked in with a bouquet of flowers and a warm smile that instantly made the room feel brighter. "Sorry, visiting hours are almost over," I said, trying to sound professional despite noticing how attractive he was. "I just got off a flight and came straight here," he explained. "Could I have just a few minutes?" Something about his genuine concern for his friend made me bend the rules slightly. 10 minutes, I said with a small smile. When he left, he stopped by the nurse's station to thank me. We chatted briefly, and before leaving, he asked if he could take me for coffee sometime. I hesitated. I had a strict policy of not dating patients' relatives or friends, but something about him made me say yes. Our first date was at a small coffee shop downtown. He was charming, attentive, and surprisingly down-to-earth for someone who, as I would later learn, came from significant wealth. We talked for hours about our dreams, our childhoods, our favorite books. Unlike previous dates I'd been on, Julian actually listened when I spoke about my passion for nursing. Our relationship progressed quickly. Julian was romantic in ways I'd only seen in movies: surprise picnics in the park, handwritten notes left on my windshield, weekend trips to charming bed and breakfasts. When he first took me to his downtown loft, I was intimidated by the sleek furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, but he never made me feel out of place. "It's just stuff," he'd said, noticing my discomfort as I looked at what was clearly an expensive painting. "None of it matters as much as finding someone who gets you." 6 months into our relationship, I started noticing small things. Julian always insisted on paying whenever we went out, even when I offered to split the bill. Initially, I found it gentlemanly, but over time, it felt like he was subtly reminding me of our financial disparity. "You work so hard saving lives," he'd say. "Let me handle this." Then there were the decisions made without consulting me. He once booked an expensive vacation to Bali, presenting it as a surprise. "But I can't take 2 weeks off work," I'd explained, "and I can't afford this." "I've already cleared it with your nursing director," he said proudly, "and it's my treat." "You deserve it." I was torn between appreciation and discomfort. While his intentions seemed good, it felt like my independence was being eroded bit by bit. Meeting his friends was another eye-opener. Most were from similar, privileged backgrounds: investment bankers, real estate developers, corporate lawyers. At a dinner party at his friend Orion's penthouse, I overheard a conversation that made my stomach turn. "So, you're actually dating a nurse?" a woman named Callista asked Julian while I was supposedly out of earshot. "That's different for you." Alara is amazing, Julian had defended. She's not like anyone I've dated before. I'm sure she's sweet, Callista had replied with a condescending smile, and it must be nice dating someone so nurturing. Julian hadn't properly challenged her underlying judgment, and that hurt. Still, I believed love could bridge our different worlds. When he proposed on our 1-year anniversary during a hot air balloon ride at sunrise, I said yes without hesitation. The ring was extravagant, a flawless 3-carat diamond that felt heavy on my finger. Are you sure it's not too much? I'd asked, referring to both the ring and the speed of our relationship. Nothing's too much when it comes to you, he'd replied, kissing me as the sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. Despite the warning bells occasionally ringing in the back of my mind, I was in love and ready to build a life with Julian, differences and all. The Croft family estate sat on 5 acres in the most exclusive neighborhood in the city. As we drove through the wrought iron gates up the curved driveway, my palms began to sweat. The house, no mansion, was a sprawling, Georgian-style structure with perfectly manicured gardens and a fountain in the center of the circular driveway. You grew up here? I asked Julian, trying to keep the awe from my voice. It's just a house, he said with a shrug that suggested he'd never known anything different. The interior was even more impressive. Marble floors in the entryway, crystal chandeliers hanging from high ceilings, and antique furniture that looked too valuable to actually sit on. Family portraits lined one wall, generations of Croft men and women staring down with the same confident expression Julian often wore. Alistair and Seraphina Croft were waiting in what they called the small sitting room, which was larger than my entire apartment. Alistair was tall like Julian, but with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to evaluate everything in terms of monetary value. Seraphina was slim and elegant in an understated designer dress, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. So, this is the nurse, Seraphina said, after Julian introduced us, her tone making my profession sound like a curious hobby rather than a career. Alara is the head nurse in the ICU, Julian corrected, squeezing my hand. How dedicated, Seraphina replied. It must be exhausting work. It can be, I admitted, but it's also incredibly rewarding. I'm sure, she said with a dismissive smile before turning to Julian. Darling, tell your father about that new project your firm is bidding on. That set the tone for the evening. Every attempt at conversation was redirected. Every mention of my work met with polite disinterest. During dinner in their formal dining room, served by their housekeeper, Ines, I noticed how different Julian was around his parents. His usual warmth and playfulness disappeared, replaced by formal responses and perfect table manners. The Montgomerys have invited us to their charity gala next month, Seraphina mentioned as we ate. Julian, you should attend. Their daughter, Isolde, just returned from Europe. I'll bring Alara, Julian replied, reaching for my hand under the table. Oh, Seraphina said, her smile tightening. It's quite exclusive. I'm not sure if there are extra invitations. Then I won't go, Julian said firmly, surprising me with his directness. Alistair cleared his throat. The Montgomerys are important connections, son. Their foundation funds half the projects your firm handles. The conversation moved to investments, society acquaintances, and family friends I'd never heard of. I sat silently, feeling increasingly out of place despite Julian's occasional reassuring glances. After dinner, Seraphina gave me a tour that felt more like an exhibition of their wealth, the original artwork, the antiques passed down through generations, the china that had belonged to some distant relative who'd been an ambassador. The Croft family has always valued quality and tradition, she said, running her fingers along a mahogany sideboard. This piece is from the 1800s. Julian will inherit it, of course. When Seraphina excused herself to speak with Ines about some household matter, I attempted to connect with her by offering to help. Oh, that's sweet, she said with a laugh that made me feel childish. But Ines has been with us for 20 years. She knows how things should be done. The subtle message was clear. I didn't belong in their world, and I didn't know how things should be done. Later that night, as Julian drove us back to the city, I couldn't hold back my feelings anymore. "Your mother doesn't like me," I said quietly. "Mom's just protective," Julian replied, keeping his eyes on the road. "She's like that with everyone at first. She practically suggested you should be dating a sold Montgomery instead." Julian sighed. "That's just how they are. They've had this vision of my life mapped out since I was born. But I choose you, Alara, not their vision. They made me feel like I don't belong," I admitted. Julian pulled the car over and turned to face me. "Listen to me. My parents come from a different generation with different values. Yes, they're snobs, and yes, they're overly concerned with status and connections. But they don't decide who I love. We're going to create our own life, our own family. I promise." His words reassured me, and I wanted desperately to believe him. Despite my reservations about his parents, I loved Julian and was committed to our future together. Over the next few months, as we planned our wedding, I made several more attempts to bond with Serafina, offering to help with wedding details, asking about family traditions, even trying to learn about their cherished antiques. Each attempt was politely but firmly redirected. "The wedding planner handles those details. Perhaps something simpler would suit you better. These family matters are quite complex." Julian continued to minimize his parents' behavior. "They'll come around," he would say. "Just give them time." I focused instead on our relationship and our plans. Julian had talked about buying a house in a neighborhood I loved, starting our own traditions, maybe even having children in a few years. That was the future I held on to as we moved forward with the wedding plans, a future where we defined our own happiness, independent of his family's expectations. I should have seen the prenup coming, but somehow I didn't. 3 weeks before our wedding, just as final preparations were falling into place, Julian called on a Thursday evening. "My father wants us to come over tomorrow for a family meeting," he said, his voice oddly formal. "What about?" I asked, immediately anxious. "Just some wedding details, I think," he replied vaguely. The next day, we sat in Alistair's wood-paneled home office, Alistair behind his massive desk, Serafina perched elegantly in an armchair, Julian and I side by side on an uncomfortable leather sofa. The tension in the room was palpable. Alistair placed a thick document on the desk. "As you know, the Croft family has significant assets that have been carefully managed across generations." My stomach dropped as I realized what was happening. "This is a standard prenuptial agreement," Alistair continued, sliding the document toward us. "Nothing unusual. Just protection of family assets and properties." I looked at Julian, who wouldn't meet my eyes. "We assumed you'd have mentioned this already, Julian," Serafina added with a slight edge to her voice. "I was going to," Julian mumbled, still not looking at me. With shaking hands, I took the document and began reading. The legal language was dense, but certain phrases jumped out at me. "Separate property shall remain separate. No claim to family businesses or investments. The family home at 1420 Lakeview Drive shall remain the exclusive property of Julian Croft." "This is a lot," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's fairly standard," Alistair replied dismissively. "Our attorney, Sterling, can explain any sections you don't understand." "What we want to make clear," Serafina interjected, her voice crisp, "is that family assets remain protected. This is Julian's house, and you'll leave with nothing if things don't work out. That's just common sense." The bluntness of her statement hit me like a physical blow. The implication was clear. I was an outsider, potentially a gold digger, someone they needed to protect their precious son and assets from. "I don't. I need time to look this over," I managed to say. "Of course," Alistair nodded, "but we'll need it signed before the wedding." "The invitations have been sent, but arrangements can be modified if necessary." The threat was thinly veiled. Sign, or the wedding might not happen. In the car afterward, I finally broke down. How could you blindside me like this? 3 weeks before our wedding. It's just a formality, Julian insisted, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Just to protect the family businesses and properties. It doesn't mean anything about us. It means your family thinks I'm marrying you for money. It means they've prepared for our divorce before we've even gotten married. That's not fair, Julian argued. My parents have built something they want to protect. This isn't personal. Not personal? I was incredulous. Your mother literally said I would leave with nothing. How is that not personal? Julian's expression hardened. You're overreacting. This is standard for families like mine. Families like yours, I repeated, the divide between us suddenly seeming insurmountable. That night, I stayed at my apartment alone, crying until I had no tears left. The next day, I called Thea Solberg, an attorney I could actually afford. After reviewing the prenup, she frowned deeply. This is extremely one-sided, she explained. It essentially protects all of Julian's assets while leaving you vulnerable. If you divorce, you could walk away with almost nothing, regardless of how long you're married or what you contribute to the relationship. Can I negotiate changes? I asked. You can try, Thea replied cautiously, but these high-powered family attorneys usually don't budge much. If you want my honest advice, I'd reconsider the marriage if he insists on these terms. When I met with Julian that evening, I tried to explain my concerns. I'm not signing this as written, I told him firmly. It's completely one-sided. What do you want to change? He asked, sounding exasperated. For starters, I want a mutual infidelity clause. If either of us cheats, it nullifies certain protections. I also want provisions that recognize the length of the marriage, more protections for me the longer we're together. Julian ran his hands through his hair in frustration. My parents won't like this. This isn't about your parents, Julian. This is about us and our future. After several tense days and multiple drafts, Julian finally presented me with an ultimatum. My parents are getting impatient. Either sign the prenup with the small changes we've agreed to, or we need to postpone the wedding. Postponing meant losing deposits, explaining to all our guests, and facing the humiliation of a delayed wedding because his family didn't trust me. More importantly, it meant Julian was choosing his family's demands over my feelings. After another sleepless night, I made my decision. I would sign the modified prenup, which now included the infidelity clause and some minor concessions about personal property. It wasn't ideal, but I loved Julian and wanted to believe his promises that this document would gather dust in a drawer somewhere, never to be needed. The day I signed, I caught the smug exchange of glances between Alistair and Serafina. They had won this round, and they knew it. Julian squeezed my hand and whispered, "Thank you. This means nothing for us, I promise." As I signed my name on that final page, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just signed away more than legal rights. I had surrendered something of myself, compromised my values for love. What I didn't know then was how prophetic Serafina's cold words would prove to be and how differently things would unfold than any of the Croft family could have imagined. Our wedding was picture perfect, exactly as Serafina had orchestrated it. I walked down the aisle in a designer gown chosen by Serafina, past 200 guests, mostly Julian's family connections, to classical music selected by Serafina. Despite the tensions leading up to the day, I was genuinely happy and hopeful. As we exchanged vows, Julian looked at me with such love that I believed we could overcome any obstacle together. Our honeymoon in the Maldives was blissful, 2 weeks of paradise where Julian was fully present, attentive, and loving. Away from his parents' influence, he was the man I had fallen in love with. We talked about our future, made plans, and I allowed myself to believe that the prenup incident was behind us. Reality hit when we returned. Rather than finding our own place, as Julian had once suggested, we moved into a house in an exclusive neighborhood that his parents had purchased, but put in Julian's name, another asset protected by the prenup. I tried to make it our home, painting rooms and buying furniture that reflected our taste rather than the Croft aesthetic. but Serafina had other ideas. "That color is rather vibrant for a dining room, isn't it?" she commented during an unannounced visit 3 weeks after we'd moved in. The Croft homes have always had a certain elegance to them. "I like color," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "It makes a space feel lived in." "Well, it certainly looks lived in now," she murmured, running a finger along a shelf as if checking for dust. These visits became regular occurrences. Serafina would stop by, often without calling first, to deliver housewarming gifts we didn't need or to check how we were settling in. Each visit included subtle criticism of my homemaking, my decorating choices, even the way I organized the kitchen. The good china should be in the dining room cabinet, not mixed with everyday dishes, she instructed once, actually opening cabinets and rearranging things while I stood by, stunned by her audacity. Julian was no help. "She's just trying to be helpful," he would say. "Mom has always been particular about homes." Alistair's interference was more financial. He constantly offered advice on our spending, investments, and my career. "Nursing is admirable, but the hours are terrible," he commented over dinner at their house one evening. "Have you considered hospital administration? At least the pay would be better." "I like working directly with patients," I replied. "Not every career choice is about maximizing income." Alistair exchanged a glance with Serafina that clearly communicated what they thought of my priorities. As months passed, I noticed Julian subtly changing. The man who had once said, "It's just stuff," when referring to his expensive possessions, now lectured me about using the everyday towels instead of the guest towels when my friend Wren visited. The man who had admired my dedication to nursing now complained about my long shifts and weekend work. The man who had promised we would create our own life increasingly deferred to his parents' expectations and values. My career, meanwhile, was thriving. I was promoted to head nurse of the ICU, a position that came with more responsibility and a modest pay increase. When I excitedly shared the news with Julian and his parents during dinner, Serafina merely nodded politely. "That's nice, dear. Alistair, tell Julian about the new development opportunity in Westlake." My achievement was dismissed in favor of business talk that deliberately excluded me. Later, when I mentioned my hurt feelings to Julian, he seemed genuinely confused. "They said, 'Congratulations,' didn't they? What more did you want?" Social events were another battlefield. At charity galas, golf club dinners, and cocktail parties with Julian's circle, I was clearly viewed as an oddity, the nurse who had somehow landed a Croft. Women would ask patronizing questions about my little job or comment on how brave Julian was to marry outside their social circle. Men would speak to Julian about business and investments, then turn to me with simplified explanations, as if I couldn't possibly understand complex topics. Julian never corrected them. Sometimes he even joined in, patting my hand while saying things like, "Alara doesn't worry about investment strategies. She's focused on helping people." The divide between us grew wider. We began arguing about things that had never been issues before: money, time with friends, family obligations. Julian started working later, attending more business dinners, and spending weekends golfing with his father and associates. One evening, while paying bills, which Julian had largely left to me, despite his concern about my financial acumen, I discovered credit card statements for accounts I didn't know existed. Julian had been making large purchases, designer clothing, expensive dinners, even jewelry, that weren't showing up in our joint expenses. When confronted, he was defensive. "I've always had separate accounts. Did you think everything would be joint just because we're married?" "I thought we'd be transparent," I replied. "I thought we were building a life together." "We are," he insisted, "but some things are simpler kept separate." I began to realize how naive I'd been. The prenup wasn't just a document forced by his parents. It was a reflection of Julian's own, compartmentalized view of our marriage. There were parts of his life I wasn't welcome in, decisions I wasn't consulted on, and a fundamental lack of partnership that became increasingly difficult to ignore. As our first anniversary approached, I felt more isolated than ever. My friendships had suffered as I tried to fit into Julian's world. My family, though loving, couldn't relate to the specific challenges of my marriage. I was living in a beautiful house that never felt like home, with a husband who resembled less and less the man I had fallen in love with. I still loved Julian, or at least the person I believed he could be. I still hoped we could find our way back to each other. But increasingly, I wondered if we had ever truly been on the same path at all. What I didn't know was that the biggest test of our marriage, and the most unexpected twist in my life, was just around the corner. The call came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon while I was charting at the nurse's station. An unfamiliar number with a Boston area code. "Is this Alara Vance-Croft?" a formal male voice asked. When I answered, "Yes, this is she," I stepped away from my colleagues for privacy. "This is Gideon Finch from Blackwell, Hayes and Partners in Boston. I'm calling regarding your great-uncle, Silas Vance's estate." Great-uncle Silas? I vaguely remembered him, my father's uncle who had left the family decades ago after some long-forgotten disagreement. I'd met him only once as a child. "I'm sorry, but I think there's been a mistake," I said. I barely knew my great-uncle. "Nevertheless, Ms. Croft, you are the sole beneficiary of his estate. Mr. Vance passed away last month, and his will is quite specific." I sat down, suddenly lightheaded. What does that mean exactly?" Mr. Finch cleared his throat. "It means, Ms. Croft, that you have inherited approximately $22 million in liquid assets, plus real estate holdings in Massachusetts and Vermont, and a small but valuable art collection." The room seemed to spin. "That's impossible. Uncle Silas was just normal." "Mr. Vance was quite private about his wealth," the lawyer explained. "He made some excellent early investments in technology companies in the 1980s and lived well below his means. Would you be available to meet in Boston next week to discuss the details?" I agreed in a daze, hanging up just as Julian called. Without thinking it through, I immediately shared the news. $22 million? Julian repeated, his voice rising with excitement. "Are you serious? This is incredible, Alara. I'm coming home right now to celebrate." Julian arrived an hour later with champagne and a bouquet of roses, more enthusiasm than he'd shown in months. That night, as we drank champagne, he was full of ideas about what we could do with our windfall. "We could invest in that beachfront property Alistair told us about," he suggested, "or become angel investors in some of the startups my friends are launching. This changes everything." I nodded along, but something felt off about his sudden attentiveness. Still, I wanted to believe this could be a fresh start for us, a chance to build something together on more equal footing. Over the next few days, Julian's behavior shifted dramatically. He came home early from work, planned romantic dinners, and suddenly seemed interested in my opinions again. He accompanied me to Boston for the meeting with Mr. Finch, attentively taking notes as we discussed trusts, investments, and tax implications. The Croft family's reaction to my inheritance was equally dramatic. Serafina called to invite me to lunch, just the two of us, a first in our relationship. "Alara, darling," she cooed across the table at her country club, "I've been thinking we should spend more time together. Perhaps a shopping trip to New York? I know all the best boutiques." Alistair was more direct, inviting us over for a financial strategy session. "You'll want to protect and grow this windfall," he explained, presenting a folder of investment opportunities. "The Croft family has connections with the best financial advisors in the country. We're happy to make introductions." Their sudden warmth and inclusion might have been flattering if it hadn't been so transparently motivated by my new financial status. The people who had treated me as an unwelcome outsider for over a year were now embracing me as family, all because I now had money of my own. Despite my reservations, part of me hoped this might be a turning point. Perhaps with financial parity came respect. Perhaps Julian and I could now truly build our life on our own terms. My optimism was short-lived. Acting on a recommendation from Mr. Finch, I hired Reina Sato, an independent financial advisor experienced with sudden wealth. She cautioned me about relationships and opportunists. My husband, Julian, was excited about investments, but Raina advised keeping my inheritance separate, establishing trusts first. Julian's enthusiasm waned, preferring Alistair's risky options. I insisted on caution. Julian became distant, resuming late nights. Suspecting infidelity, I found his car at his ex-girlfriend Lyra's. I photographed them kissing. At home, when confronted, Julian feigned surprise, then admitted an affair with Lyra. He claimed it was recent and meaningless, but I realized he'd seen me as a possession, my wealth increasing my value to his family. I told him to leave. Our marriage was over. The tears flowed freely that first night, a torrent of grief and disbelief. But amidst the despair, a plan began to take shape, a fragile seedling of resolve pushing through the darkness. The next morning, my voice hoarse, I reached out to Ren, my lifeline in times of trouble. I needed a safe haven, a place to regroup, and I desperately needed a recommendation for a divorce attorney. Not just any attorney, but someone who understood the complexities of wealth and the often murky world of prenuptial agreements. Ren, as always, came through, offering both a spare room and the name of Kian Mercer. Kian Mercer, a name whispered with respect and perhaps a touch of fear in certain circles, was renowned for handling high-asset divorces. He was known for his meticulous attention to detail, his strategic brilliance, and his unwavering focus on protecting his clients' interests. Our initial consultation centered on the prenuptial agreement, the document that Julian and his family had clearly believed would safeguard their wealth. However, as Kian meticulously reviewed the clauses, a flicker of something akin to satisfaction crossed his face. He pointed out the infidelity clause, a seemingly innocuous paragraph that held the key to unlocking the entire agreement. The evidence of Julian's infidelity, Kian explained, completely nullified the protections it was designed to provide. It was no longer simply about assets, it was about betrayal and deceit. Taking refuge at Ren's apartment, I found myself surrounded by unwavering support. Raina, ever the strategist, joined our makeshift war room. Together, we formulated a plan to secure my inheritance, the wealth that Julian and the Croft family seemed so eager to control. And, equally important, we began the painstaking process of gathering irrefutable evidence of Julian's affair. We meticulously documented every detail, every rendezvous, every careless slip-up that proved his infidelity. Beyond the immediate betrayal, we also unearthed a tangled web of financial manipulations orchestrated by the Croft family. Their intricate schemes, designed to consolidate their wealth and power, became increasingly clear. Julian's initial reaction was one of disbelief. He seemed genuinely shocked that I would dare to challenge him, to question the carefully constructed facade of our marriage. His shock soon morphed into desperate pleas, a cascade of apologies and promises that rang hollow in the face of his betrayal. When those pleas failed to sway me, his demeanor shifted again, hardening into thinly veiled aggression. It was then that I revealed the full extent of my knowledge, the devastating impact of the infidelity clause on the prenuptial agreement. The carefully laid plans of the Croft family were crumbling before their eyes. Julian, his composure shattered, demanded money, revealing the true extent of his avarice. He had been counting on my inheritance, viewing me as nothing more than a means to an end. The Croft family, their carefully cultivated image of respectability threatened, exerted immense pressure, attempting to intimidate me into submission. But I stood firm, bolstered by the unwavering support of my friends and the unshakable confidence of my legal team. I filed for divorce, taking decisive action to protect my financial security and reclaim my independence. The climax of this charade arrived at a Croft family dinner, a gathering where they fully expected my compliance, my capitulation to their demands. It was there, amidst the forced smiles and polite conversation, that I presented the divorce papers. The revelation that Julian's infidelity had voided the prenuptial agreement hung heavy in the air, a bombshell that shattered their carefully constructed world. I had proof, irrefutable evidence that exposed Julian's betrayal and the Croft family's machinations. Serafina, her face contorted with fury, unleashed a torrent of vitriol, revealing the depth of her disdain. I calmly gathered my belongings, stating that my attorney would be in contact with them, fully aware that they had never accepted me for who I was, but only for what I represented, a source of wealth and influence. The divorce proceedings moved swiftly, expedited by the overwhelming evidence of Julian's infidelity. He ultimately settled, realizing the futility of further resistance. With the legal battles behind me, I embarked on a new chapter, a journey of healing and self-discovery. I moved to a new city, eager to shed the suffocating weight of the Croft family and their expectations. I poured my energy into my career, finding fulfillment and purpose in my work. I began therapy, addressing the emotional scars left by the betrayal and learning to trust again. And, driven by a desire to give back, I established a nursing scholarship foundation, providing opportunities for aspiring nurses to pursue their dreams. 6 months later, I unexpectedly crossed paths with Julian. The encounter was brief, awkward, and ultimately unsatisfying. He offered a perfunctory apology, his words laced with self-pity, focusing primarily on his own loss and the consequences he had suffered. I wished him well, a gesture of closure rather than forgiveness, and walked away, leaving him behind. The experience served as a final reminder of the past, a past I was determined to leave behind as I embraced the possibilities of the future.